When I came to Lismore many years ago, 1976, I was initially intrigued by the school's name, Lismore, because almost all Catholic schools built in the 1960s and 70s in Northern Ireland were named after saints. In our own parish here we have St Brendan's and St Anthony's, and Lismore was an unusual choice of name for a post-primary Catholic school. I knew from having studied Irish at university that Lis and More were two Irish words meaning big and fort, and was pretty certain that there would be the remains of an ancient fort or rath in the school grounds, and that turned out to be the case. Lis is the Irish word for a defended circular fort, a little bit like the place name Rath and Doon, very common Irish place names, all meaning the same thing, and More, an adjective meaning big. So when I came to Lismore in 1976, I began to explore the site of the fort and a little bit of the history behind it. The original parish priest in our parish and the first chair of governors was a Canon Murray, and it was he who wanted to preserve the name Lismore for posterity in the school's beginnings. And he often said to me when I came here at the beginning that he would like me to follow up and clear up the fort a little bit and to make it a bit more accessible to the public. And I did that over a period of years. When I began, it was covered in scrub and bush and trees, and part of what we did was to remove a lot of the scrub, tidy up the area, did a little bit of reseeding. We had to work under strict archaeological conditions, no burning in situ. The fort that we're talking about here would have been an early Christian farmstead settlement dating back roughly 1,000 years. I brought an archaeologist in fairly early on, and he would date our fort between 700 and 1000 AD, which would make it roughly 1,000, perhaps more, years old. What it would have been back in those times would have been a circular defended area where an extended family would have lived. They would have brought their animals in at night time for safekeeping inside the fort. They would have had them outside during the day, grazing on the surrounding farmland. But because in those days animals were currency, they would have brought them in at night for safekeeping against marauding tribes, wolves and so on. As you can see today is a circular flattened area surrounded by a defensive ditch or moat, and that's really all that remains 1,000 years later. But it's extraordinary that even that does, because there would have been thousands of these lisses or raths or dunes dotted all over the countryside 1,000 years ago. Almost all of them now have been demolished either through ploughing, farming, house building, road building and so on. So there are very few left, and we were delighted to have one within our school campus. The buildings inside the rath in those days would have consisted of wattle circular huts with a thatched roof, and there's no evidence left of any of those. They have been subsumed into the ground and under the ground. But the ditch and the moat is very visible, particularly from above, and there's no doubt whatsoever that this was an important gathering place back in those days. It was very often on a height and had a causewayed entrance as access into the fort, and we were able to find out where that was, and it still remained after 1,000 years once we undertook the clearance work. And the archaeologists said that they'd no doubt if they dug ours they would find remains of bone, pottery and so on as they had in other lisses. But they don't need to do that, and they preferred us to preserve this. 1,000 years ago there would have been a circular palisaded wooden fence on the inside rim of the fort to help the defences as well as the moat surrounding it. And the only way in was through the causewayed entrance that we were able to discover under all the scrub, with some of the original boulders there that had been laid down to provide the access into it. So it was quite exciting to discover this so undisturbed. One of the things I did was to go to a neighbouring quarry in Tandragee Emerson's and get a very large piece of granite and have it shaped to receive a commemorative plaque which basically told the history of the lists. The fort, we have made it available to local schools, a local archaeology group and community groups who are interested in history, and it's delightful in the summertime to be able to present history lessons in a site basically which is 1,000 years old. It always struck me as ironic that in Craigavon, which is one of the newest, if not the newest town in Ireland, only here since the 1960s, that we have something so ancient on our campus. And it's lovely to think that we have a tangible and living link with the farmers and workers who settled this land 1,000 years ago.